soul tore them down and hope that they will never see the truth around. Another promise, another scene, another package lie to keep us trapped in greed. Another green bells wrapped around our minds, an endless red tape to keep the truth confined. They will not force us. They will stop degrading us. They will not control us. We will be victorious.
Hello, and thank you all so much for joining. Miguel, always first, comrade. I love it. I absolutely adore you. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. This is a really awesome show I've been looking forward to. Brad, who is above there, I actually met him at the first Free Palestine Ceasefire Now rally I went to, and that was in Lancaster. And he was standing at the movie theater, and I was just kind of like, oh, what's going on? And then I was just like, told my husband, okay, I'm staying. There's a rally, so I'll see you later. So Brad, thank you for joining. Also, Nick, you have an over 50-year history of activism and peace work. So I'm so excited to have both of you. Why don't we start with Nick? Can you just share some of your work? I know you are part of Veterans of Peace and some other organizations. Can you just give people like an idea of some of the work you've been doing?
Yes, thank you. I'm very happy to be here this evening. I am on the National Board of Veterans for Peace. It's an organization that tries to not only mobilize veterans to oppose war in all its forms, but also to assist veterans in a variety of ways through the VA and other ways. So I was in the Navy from 1960 to 1964. Part of that time I was in Vietnam. I did not see combat while I was there, but of course I did see the effects of the war in a variety of ways. And that really set me on a path of anti-war activity. Not constantly since that time, but over the last 30 years, that's been pretty much what I've been occupied with in one way or the other. Right now, I'm co-coordinator with Kathy Kelly of a group called Ban Killer Drones, and we're promoting an international treaty that would say no weapons of any kind on any drones. Obviously, that's quite a lot of heavy lifting given how devoted a number of countries are to killing people with drones. But we believe that most of the people in the world do not want weapons on drones. They don't want it regulated. They want it stopped. I'm also very pleased that I can be working with Brad and Kathy and a number of other volunteers on the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal. And in terms of my background is as a reporter and researcher and writer, so I think this is one of the most inspiring projects I've ever been involved with, and not only because of the nature of the subject matter, but because of the people I'm working with. So I think
that's amazing.
And I'm a person who likes to be in the street protesting. I think changes for the better are made in the street. And so I'm very happy to be able to do that.
Absolutely. Brad, do you want to share a little about yourself and also tell us a little more about Merchants of Death? And it's not a band, you guys. It sounds like a band, but it's not.
Not yet.
Yeah, it's not a band. And thanks so much for having us on, Joy. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk about peace and nonviolent resistance, about the tribunal. Our hearts are heavy, as it is for a lot of people right now. The world is in a very difficult place. But as for me, I'm in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I am the executive director of Peace Action Network of Lancaster. We are an affiliate of Peace Action National, and we are a partner of World Beyond War. I'm also a writer. I write for Common Dreams, Counterpoint, The Progressive, Peace Voice, a number of other publications, antiwar.com. And I have a new book coming out that I need to promote. It's called A Ministry of Risk. It's the selected writings of Philip Berrigan. It will be published in April of 2024. And it's by Fordham University Press. What we are working on now, and what takes almost all of my time now, is the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal. And that's a project that I very proudly and am honored to share with Nick and with Kathy Kelly. And we started this project almost 2 years ago, the three of us, coming up with the idea of holding a people's tribunal to hold accountable U.S. weapons manufacturers for aiding and abetting the United States government in committing crimes against humanity and war crimes. And I'm a lawyer and a former prosecutor, and so the idea of using a legal proceeding or a pseudo-legal proceeding was very interesting to me. And Nick and Kathy were quite familiar with people's tribunals due to their long history of activism. So once we hit on the idea, we decided to go forward with it. Immediately, people started volunteering to help us. Colonel Ann Wright, Marjorie Cohn, Bill Quigley were well-renowned attorneys, Matthew Ho. We were able to interview people for the tribunal to collect evidence, such as Cornell West, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, John Pilger, Richard Falk, Christian Sorensen, William Astori, probably 20 people. And the idea for the tribunal is for us to present evidence to jurors from across the globe who will deliberate on this evidence and decide whether U.S. weapons manufacturers are guilty of knowingly producing weapons that kill civilians. Now, this tribunal is not a legal tribunal, so we don't have the authority to exact any kind of punishment, but it is grassroots justice. This is what happens when the courts have been captured by the criminals, when a government is non-responsive. The people form a tribunal of their own and present the evidence and demand action based on what they presented. So we're going to be presenting our evidence in the forms of videos over the course of the next 4 months. And this is something that we hope lots of people across the globe will be watching. We'll be showing how these weapons manufacturers lobby and influence members of Congress, how they influence and have hijacked the United States foreign policy, how they create needless war for profit. They've been doing it for a long time. They're very good at it. Their tentacles extend everywhere. And we want to shine a light on all of that and use these videos as an educational process for a lot of people. So that, in a nutshell, is the tribunal. The opening session is November 12th. It's coming up in less than 2 weeks. It's a Sunday evening. It will be live streamed. It is free. And if people go to merchantsofdeath.org, that's merchantsofdeath.org, you can register there and you're good to go. We ask everybody to please do that. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues, everybody. We want to discuss lots of discussion groups based around it.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of great information on that website, also some great articles. Nick, I do want to talk about, I mean, obviously on our minds, as you know, continuously we're consumed with Gaza, as we all should be. But as someone who has been to Vietnam and who has protested throughout those years, can you touch on, you know, I mean, there's way more war going on that kind of we don't really have in the forefront right now. So can you kind of address what your life cycle has been like, just kind of seeing more and more war throughout it?
Well, I think to start off with, I'll say that when the Vietnam War ended, and the way it ended, I had high hopes that the United States people would decide they wanted to turn away from essentially what are colonial wars, and that there would be a path toward conversion of military industry to peacetime use. Actually, the Second World War was the first war that ended where the production of weapons and militarism did just plummet. And part of it was that these industries saw that the idea of anti-communism, quote unquote, was a powerful fear factor for the American people. It would help justify the continuation of military industry. Lockheed Martin was virtually on the edge of going out of business after World War II and lobbying within the Congress for different projects. I think one of the most disappointing things as I've done research about the tribunal is analyzing Dwight Eisenhower's statement and compared to his behavior. His statement at the end of his presidency, before John Kennedy became president, was that we should beware of the military-industrial complex. Now, at the time he made these statements, I wasn't in any way hip to what was going on in the world. I had an uncle who was in the military, a person I loved and very caring person. And when I went into the Navy, I went in there because I did not want to go in National Guard and go to summer camp, 7 years running. And so I was very ignorant of these different things that had been going on, while I was growing up. And one of them, of course, was the McCarthy era, the blacklisting, the fear-mongering around communism. And so when I graduated college in 1960, that was a year, just after, it was actually in 1961 when Eisenhower went out of office. And so he delivered this speech talking about the military-industrial complex. Well, that all sounded really good, but as it turns out, Eisenhower took a lot of covert actions that had, using the CIA as a paramilitary organization, running a coup in Iran to overthrow Mossadegh to get hold of oil, running a coup in Guatemala to help the United Fruit Company, getting rid of Patrice Lumumba in Congo. And there are other instances too, where I think Eisenhower looked and said, people in this country don't want to go to war anymore to support this empire. So we're going to use CIA as a military operation. It's the first time that had been done. And so many of the problems that we have right now were really opened up and begun at the same time he was saying, beware of this. Now, he may have understood very well that, he had a monster on his hands, and that's all well and good. But going forward, I've been involved in and out with various struggles that Eisenhower helped create. And so it's a horrible thing for me to see this thing going on in Gaza, because we're going to be 85 years old in January. And a number of other people have never ever seen a situation where 2.3 million people were essentially caged, prevented from leaving, prevented from eating, prevented from having health care, prevented from having water, and then slaughtered, behind all that. And so we want, a ceasefire But we also want an end to the creation of these colonies, armed colonies to benefit U.S. corporations. Basically, that's what this is all about, in my opinion. And I know I have trouble sleeping behind all this because we're here in the United States, where if it were not for the United States providing the money and the weapons to the Israeli government, and I make a distinction between the Israeli government and the Israeli people, because I'm firmly convinced that most Israeli people are not wanting this thing to go on in this way any more than most of the people in the United States. But all of the people are suffering from a huge lack of information, and so I'm glad we're, being on this show. And I think one of the problems is that a huge number of American people have said, I'm not watching any more news. I don't want to hear about any of this stuff. I want to live my life in peace. And that doesn't change the fact that their money's going to pay for it. They just don't want to hear about it. And so we've got a very dangerous situation, not only because of what's going on in the Middle East, but because we've got a population in this country, many of whom have been determined to disengage themselves from a situation that could lead to the obliteration of the world.
Absolutely. Brad, would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, this idea that people want to tune out, I hear that as well from a lot of folks. They want to tune out the bad news. They feel it's overwhelming. What can they do? And there's a lot that they can do. Tuning it out means that you have to relinquish part of your humanity. If you're going to tune out what's going on in the world and the fact that as an American, you are a beneficiary of a lot of the suffering that's happening in the world, if you want to tune that out, then you're going to be one of those technocratic zombies that the military-industrial complex wants you to be. And you cannot do that. You need to assert your humanity in the face of it. And you need to do it in whatever way you can. And that can be by writing, by speaking, by marching, calling your congressman. But you need to do something. You need to participate. Because as Nick said, these are our tax dollars that are building the bombs that are falling on the Palestinians right now, that are ginning up the war, in Ukraine, in Somalia, in Sudan, and all the countries that the tribunal is looking at. These weapons manufacturers are making record profits right now. They love it. They're happy. They're gleeful. They've got a buy signal, right, on all of these weapons manufacturers at this point. And it's blood money, and it's awful, and it's our money that goes to contribute to it, and it's the name of our country. So as citizens of America, we have a unique responsibility to stand up and to do something and to not tune out the news, but to learn as much as we can, to get to the truth, and then to take action about it. Nick had mentioned, being in the streets and likes being in the streets. We were in the streets last year delivering subpoenas to these weapons manufacturers. It was last November of 2022. We returned on February 14th down in the DC metro area to deliver contempt citations to them. We're going back next Wednesday, November 8th. If anybody would like to join in that nonviolent action against these weapons manufacturers, you can email me through the Merchants of Death website. There's an email contact right there. So email me and I can give you the specifics about that.
Awesome. Now, when you say that you subpoenaed them and went through that, as a lawyer, these were actual subpoenas. Like it wasn't theatrical. Like these were actual legal documents.
They were not. These were documents that we created that were meant to serve as a form of political protest. And the subpoena that we served on them initially was known as a subpoena ducis tecum, which was a demand for documents. And that is a subpoena that is typically used at the beginning of a trial or a tribunal in this case. But we wanted to get down and we wanted to use that to be as visible as possible to show them that this is what we believe that they're doing. And we were inviting them to participate in this process, either supply us with these documents that will incriminate or exonerate you, or participate in the tribunal itself, be interviewed by us as to the allegations. And so when we went there, We were hoping that we were going to get their attention, which we did. And at one of the places, the director of communications came down. I believe it was Boeing, came down to receive us. We were able to talk to him as we hand delivered the subpoena to him about what his company is doing. And we did the same at General Atomics, Raytheon, and Lockheed Martin. The police were called in a few instances just to escort us off because they did not want this negative attention. And we were not there to engage in any kind of violent disruption, but nonviolent resistance, the basic act of political protest. And they did not like that attention at all. They did not like us on the street. They did not like our signs. They did not like the bad press that their corporations are killing innocent people across the globe.
Absolutely. Nick, in your, shall I say, career as an activist, have you found that some people kind of pull you aside and say, this is wrong, I witnessed this, but yet don't want to go on the record about just how bad things are, maybe if they work for the government or within the military or anything like that?
Well, in working on the issue of drone killing, I've had the opportunity to talk to a number of people who have been drone operators. And the thing that I've encountered there is not so much that what they know things they can't talk about. And so they say, I can't talk about this.
Right.
But there are several people I know who have been so psychologically harmed by that experience of basically stalking people for hours, days, weeks on end, and then killing them, that they don't want to talk about it. Because, and furthermore, people who order them to do this know very well what the impact will be on a number of them. And this was pretty much acknowledged by John Brennan, who was a CIA director at some point during an interview show that he was doing. Cornell University professors were overseeing. And I know too that I've talked to people who say, well, I have a friend who, trains drone operators, and I know I'm not supposed to say this, but I'll tell you some things, but other things, I can't tell you. So you got a situation here where people are very, very afraid to put their head up, above the edge of the foxhole and say anything that's contradictory. Now, Brad's interviewed people for the tribunal who have gotten over that fear. But in some ways, they're the flip side of the people who don't want to hear anything about it. There are people who don't want to say anything about it.
Right.
Both people are afraid. Is really what it comes down to. Mm-hmm. And so we have to ask ourselves about a culture that generates this kind of fear. And we have to ask ourselves about the mental health and how it's affecting all of us to be involved with a culture that is so committed to killing people, and where it's made to be legitimate and profit-making. Because during World War II, that was not legitimate to profiteer off of killing, because so many people had their family members torn from the family and the community and sent off to be killed, or some of them never came back and were never right in the head when they came home. So for them, after World War I, World War II, war profiteering, and during these wars was looked on as a low form of human life, the war profiteer. Now we have a situation where college and university endowment funds union pension funds, private investors, Vanguard, Investment House, State Street, all these people are lined up at this trough, and when blood starts flowing in, they start lapping up and making money. And all you have to do is watch the stock market to see how that goes. Now that's sick and it's corrupt, but it's come to be commonplace, and it's so commonplace that it's come to be something that people just shrug about and say that's the way it is.
Absolutely. Brad, one of the things that I know so many of us talk about is there, what is the right way to fight against this? Is it in the streets? Is it at the ballot box? Is it a mixture? And then that leads into, can we change anything electorally when politicians are so bought and legally allowed to take so much blood money from Lockheed Martin and what have you, and literally serve under Biden, for instance, or Obama or Trump or what have you, literally be in the government when they have worked for such entities and take that money?
That's an important point. It's not just the lobbying, it's the fact that there's a revolving door between these weapons makers, the Pentagon, the White House, and the media. And when we went to Raytheon to deliver the subpoena, we found it very ironic that at their corporate headquarters, they literally have a revolving door as the main entrance to their headquarters. So Lloyd Austin was formerly a director at Raytheon. He's now at the Pentagon. So he's approving billion-dollar orders for Raytheon. So this is it's a difficult nut to crack. But your initial question, can we do it at the electoral level, or do we have to hit the streets? I think different people in the peace movement will have different opinions about that. My own is that until there are lots of people organized, and I mean lots in the streets and well organized, our elected officials are not going to pay attention. So trying to go to them now and asking them to sign on to bills or letters to limit Pentagon spending or end wars and things is, in my mind, it's not the best use of time. I think organizing the people is the first step. And once you get the numbers behind you, then those elected officials respond. But they don't care about, me calling them, or not when Lockheed Martin is giving them, thousands of dollars. So if there's numbers of people, then they will care.
Well, I just want to offer too that I live in Northampton, Massachusetts, and there are 5 different schools around here, Smith College in the town, and then UMass Amherst that has about almost 30,000 students very close to here, Hampshire College, Mount Holyoke, and Amherst College. And what's been happening around this slaughter in Gaza is that the students have become very, very mobilized, and a smaller group of students who've been working to try to get UMass Amherst to divest from Raytheon and to cut their ties with the military contractors in terms of coming to job fairs and working on arrangements with the engineering school. Last week, they had a protest where I think about 200 students occupied the administration building, and one of their demands was to cut ties with these companies. They've already apparently discouraged Pratt & Whitney, jet engine maker for military planes, from coming to job fairs. But the administration will not make a statement that they're willing to cut ties with these contractors. 57 of these students were arrested at that time for not leaving the building when they were told to. So they're even more fired up, I think. At the same time, in the same day of this walkout, which I think was a national walkout, about 800 students walked out of Smith College and went up to the plant here in Northampton of a company called L3 Harris. it's a conglomerate. It's like an octopus sort of, five and dime store. They make all kinds of things. Here they make periscopes for submarines and also targeting equipment for naval guns. But the students were very into going to L3 and demanding that he stop making weapons and make things for peace. And they connected this directly with Gaza, which is, of course, very appropriate, because one thing that L3 has made is surveillance equipment for borders, including a border in Gaza. So I am tremendously hopeful and thankful that the students see these connections instantly. And it doesn't take, a 2-hour webinar for them to even get interested. They're already interested in acting,
It's so inspiring. And I'm one of the millions of people who, became activated in 2015 when someone named Bernie Sanders came around, and, all of a sudden I like learned all these things, and I was so very much like, yay, Obama. I didn't understand anything. And so when I was like 37, I'm like becoming, more and more astute politically. And I look at these kids and it's so inspiring. And I think, my God, how different would my life have been if I was acclimated at that age? Nick, I know you talked about being, Vietnam kind of shaping you. Brad, what kind of initially got you going into activism and especially anti-war activism?
Well, I became a prosecutor because I believed that I was naive. I believed that was the way to positively affect the world. Bobby Kennedy was somebody that I admired a great deal. He was anti-war. He was about improving race relations and mitigating poverty. And he had been a prosecutor. And so I thought, well, that's the route. That's the way to go. Public service is what it's all about. It's the only reason I went to law school. And I was very naive. And so when I got to the prosecutor's office, I realized that public service is really self-service. It's about ego. It's not about serving the public. So I left and attempted to find other ways to try to serve. I went into academia and began working at a community college, teaching and being an administrator there, serving low literacy and low income populations. So, my goal was to try to take the great benefits that I have been given. I mean, I am a white upper class male born in post World War II America. I have every benefit imaginable handed to me. And I feel with that, there's a lot of responsibility to try to do something good. And that's what I've been trying to do. And that's what I hope to continue to do with this tribunal and with other efforts that we engage in. And I know that people become dispirited and think that we're up against a machine that we can't defeat, but I really want to emphasize we can succeed. We can do this. The civil rights movement ended segregation. The anti-war movement ended the war in Vietnam. And this can be done. We just need to organize. We need to get into the street. We need to connect. So in your community, no matter how big or how small, organize, connect with other groups. World Beyond War, Peace Action, Code Pink, Pax Christi, whoever it is, find them, join and unite. And we can do this. It's definitely possible.
Absolutely. Nick, do you want to expand on that?
Well, I think that what's happening with the climate emergency is very, very important right now, because it's showing us that we don't have the luxury to just do anything that we want, with the environment, with people, with anything else. There are consequences. And I think that in the Northern Hemisphere, in European, North America, there's a huge problem of overconsumption. It's like locusts have infected the world and have to gobble up everything. And there are a lot of younger people who really are very keenly aware of this. And so in some ways, it's a generational struggle. And the younger people, and I was thinking when you were talking before, as a young woman having met, Bernie Sanders and figuring out what your future would be like. Many of these groups that are so successful in organizing in the street right now are led largely by women. Mm-hmm. And of course, that makes all kinds of sense if a young woman figures, well, I do feel like maybe I want to have children or have a child, or I have kind of a sense that I've got a limited amount of time to sort this out. And this is, I think, where climate then becomes something that is a very, much of a taskmaster about how we spend our time, how we spend our money, what we buy, where we go, how do we go. And then you throw a war in on top of that. And it becomes even more of an absurd luxury for very wealthy people. Wars are not started by the average person. They're started by people who feel like they want something or more of what they've got already. That's historically back into the beginning of human history. And I think the climate thing makes it very clear that that is not something that is any longer acceptable. And I think younger people are very hip to that.
Do you think part of that is, that younger generations are just not watching MSM? They're just not. And they're turning to independent media instead of so-called news, which is bought and skewed. And like throughout your lifetime, how have you seen that change as, the internet becomes a thing and, politically, when did you notice that change?
Well, for me, I think I noticed it during the time when Rachel Maddow and other people were constantly getting us wrapped up in, well, who is Trump and what's Trump going to do and what are the Russians going to do with Trump and all this kind of thing, which were in many ways totally side issues to things that were much more important that were going on. And so I think younger people have a very keen bullshit alarm. And mm-hmm. So when they hear this kind of stuff, they don't, debate with themselves about whether they want to spend time trying to sort it out. They just turn it off. And the internet has really gotten here, at a very important time, so that there are a lot of opportunities to learn things, to research things, and to hear commentaries that when it was just, ABC, NBC, CBS, much more able for powerful people to guide public opinion. I think the problem we have right now is that the CNN and MSNBC and these other channels are so vacuous and fear-mongering that it makes older people want to turn off the TV and not learn anything, whereas they could go to Al Jazeera and find out about what's happening right now. But the alternative is I don't want to be upset. And I guess that if we had any active kind of religious leadership, there would be more commentary about turning away from hard things. But that's where we are right now. But I think we're very lucky to have all these shows like the one you have, other people have,
Thank you. Brad, during your time protesting and organizing, and especially now with Gaza, do you find that people are open to discuss things, even if they are, lack of a better term, pro-Israel and not, having empathy for Palestinians? Do you feel like people are at least willing to have discourse?
I think there's a decent segment of the population that are still fair-minded people, and when they're given the facts, they will deliberate on them and come to the right conclusion. Without a doubt, there's people that have made up their minds already, and you're probably not going to change them. But I think there's a large segment of the American population that is still willing to take information, digest it, and come to the right conclusion. So, yeah, I think people are open to discussion. I've had discussions with people and sort of gently prodded them in certain areas with the facts. Don't beat them over the brow or anything like that with it. But when you do, the response typically has been good. And to echo what Nick was saying about younger people, our children are 25 and 26. They are a savvy group, a savvy demographic, not just our kids, but I mean, kids generally in that generation are a savvy group because they're suspicious and they're skeptical of what they hear. They're not just swallowing everything they're being told. When I was growing up, it was just CBS or NBC News. That's what you got. That's what you believed. That's what you went with. But now, they fish around for different news stories. They're trying to find out what the truth is. And they don't just swallow the first thing that they're given, which is good. You should be skeptical. You should be suspicious about things. So we're hopeful. We've had a number of young people working with us on the tribunal over the past year, college students who volunteered to do research, and they've done outstanding work. And this was volunteer work. This was not paid, volunteer work where they were helping us to put together evidence to indict these weapons manufacturers. So that was very gratifying to see that.
Absolutely. Nick, what is it you think that people really need? I mean, there's a million aspects of what's going on in Gaza, but what are some of the things that you think people need to focus on the most? That if you're trying to wake people up, that you say, look, I mean, do you give percentages? Do you give, kind of like an elevator pitch? What should we focus on when trying to talk to people about what's going on in Gaza?
Well, I think one thing is just not turn away, to feel that you do have the strength within yourself, to look at what's going on and keep looking at what's going on and see what you're motivated to do. And there's no single thing or no half dozen things. Everybody has a different inspiration, but to feel that because one is a citizen of the United States and has a special responsibility to respond to this kind of killing, because we're paying for it essentially. And so then the question is, well, who's doing what? And we have to then ask ourselves, who's running Congress? Do we need to have public financing of elections instead of campaign contributions? Who's paying, the politicians right now? Who's influencing them? And then hold them accountable with respect to, are they voting for war or peace? Every time they vote for these weapons transfers, they're voting for war. And they say, well, we're defending this person, we're defending that person. The history of the United States selling weapons to other countries or giving them to them is in the U.S. self-interest. Colonial activity because they want to have favor with a Saudi Arabia, where if they decide to shut off the oil supply, this economy is in deep, deep trouble. So those are things that we have to understand, I think, as people, that violence has been a basis for our economy since the time we took land away from Native people and brought slaves over here. And that's a hard thing to embrace, because it calls forth action. And seeing the people being slaughtered in Gaza is a hard thing. But if one keeps looking at that and embracing that, then it prompts action. And I think that's what I would say.
Absolutely. Brad, as a journalist, and I know you're not online, which is so smart for your sanity, but when you when you look at articles, especially things like New York Times and WAPO and all them, they always do that thing where they're like subconsciously planting that seed where they say things like 1,200 in Israel killed, 4,000 in Gaza have died. You know, they use that different verbiage. As a journalist, do you pick up on that a lot?
Absolutely. And I'm not sure it's subconscious. I think in many cases it's a conscious effort on their part to do that. So the hostages that Hamas took, the Israelis are referred to as hostages, but all the Palestinians that the Israelis have taken over the years are prisoners. So, this kind of language is done very subtly, and it's slipped into all the articles the New York Times and the Washington Post and the others write. And it has this sort of effect, this subliminal effect on us as we read it and we hear it. And it's meant to do that. They have a particular narrative that they have to push. There are corporate interests behind those papers, behind those media outlets. The reporters want to climb the ladder. So they've got to file particular types of stories following particular types of narratives. And so they put those words in there. And I've published an article or two in Common Dreams just about the New York Times doing this kind of thing, how they seem to be, not objective at all, but really taking a very specific side under the guise of being objective. So if you read these carefully enough, you'll start to see how these words jump out at you and how these phrases jump out at you. The Times just over the weekend was talking about anti-Semitic tropes that were being uttered by certain people. And then when you scroll down to see what these anti-Semitic tropes were, it was just things like, well, the Palestinians deserve the right to not be killed or to have a homeland and things. So that was, then the headline anti-Semitic trope. But, when you go down, that's what they're referring to as an anti-Semitic trope. So I think it's often intentional on their part. It's fulfilling a particular narrative stream. And unfortunately, people fall for it. Hopefully, things like, again, your show and internet and, the podcast and all these great online magazines that are out there like Common Dreams are going to help enlighten people and make them more aware. Antiwar.com is a wonderful place to go. To be honest with you, one of the first, I always open the New York Times first because I want to see what the mainstream media is saying each morning. And then from there, I'll go to all the other sites and try to find out then, okay, what's really going on? What's the perspective from other people behind the scenes?
And New York Times does something very interesting. They come out with new covers throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting. They have a headline, a couple hours later, a different headline, and then usually a third by the end of the day. And they're usually about the same topic, but they kind of differ as to the pushback they get. But they're never good. They're just like less shitty as the days go on. Same with WAPO. Nick, would you like to expand on what Brad discussed?
Yes, I guess I would say too about any of these online newspapers that are so popular, and I'll take the New York Times because I think I'm more familiar with that. Part of the problem I see is that right now in Gaza, we have something going on of a historic proportion that has probably not gone on in the world since before medieval times. But for any number of reasons, it appears as just one more story about something that's happening in the world. And so there's an absolute compulsion to surround these kind of stories with stories about entertainers or about what kind of shoes are the best that people like really are hip shoes now, stuff like that, with recipes. And so by the time you've done trivializing the slaughter of all these people, you've got a situation where the average person is also oblivious. But it's easy for the average person to say, yes, ship weapons over and do this. So the question is very personal to somebody who wants to ship weapons. Are you yourself prepared to go and blow somebody's brains out? Are you prepared to have your children go and be subjected to war? And if you're not prepared to do that, and if you don't want to, take that idea as a reality, then you have to make a reappraisal about whether you're going to vote for weapons to be shipped, whether you're going to advocate against ceasefires. What does that mean to advocate against a ceasefire? Could there be anything better than a ceasefire? No, because you want to have one side slaughtered. And then you have to ask yourself, are you prepared to go and start killing people? And if you're not, you have to take another look at that. I don't think most people in this country who favor sending weapons to these countries want to go over there. It's too dangerous, right? But they want somebody else to go and die for some notion they have in their head. But tomorrow they could get a totally different idea and say, oh yeah, we made a mistake. Well, that might be something that's easy for you to say we made a mistake. Not so easy for the family of someone who's, dead.
Absolutely. And online, I always say that. I'm like, when do you enlist? And they either curse me out, yell at me, or just don't respond at all. Yeah. And it's telling. It's how proud are you? You're so, yes, let's, be anti-Palestinian. When do you enlist? Because right now you're just coming across as a racist and a pro-war person. So think about it. Do you want you or your kids over there? If you don't, have some critical thinking skills.
Well, Brad. There's this. I just want to say there's this Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, and he was at a conference just about a year ago. And so they were asking him about Ukraine and sending weapons, and he said basically it's a good deal because those guys are going to go fight, and all we have to do is give them the weapons. That's pretty sick, but it also fits into the drone narrative, which people in this country feel like, oh well, it's better to send the drones over there to kill people because then we don't have to send our kids over there to do it. And when you start thinking like that, you got a serious mental health problem.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it has to be treated like that.
Yeah.
What's that?
I would go even a step further. It's not that they just want to send those weapons over there and that they won't enlist. They don't want to see the consequences of what those weapons do. So if you would try to put pictures in front of them showing them what drones do or showing them what these bombs from the weapons makers are doing in Gaza right now, they don't want to see that. It's easy to say send the weapons. It's not so easy to see the results of what you're doing. So we all share a common humanity on this planet, and it doesn't end with ethnicity or religion or national borders or oceans or continents. We're in this together. And the sooner we all realize that, the better. So I wish people would be a little less inclined to say, send weapons. Let's, put these bad guys down. It's not so easy.
Absolutely. Just before we went live, I saw a video of a rabbi who was at a press conference Biden was giving today. And she stood up and said, Mr. President, please call a ceasefire. Everyone just was like, ugh. And some lady said, get out now. And she was just in the audience. She wasn't even someone working. And they were so outraged by this. And I can't help but wonder, we hear so much about these hostages, but if they don't do a ceasefire, aren't these hostages going to get killed too? I mean, Nick, what are your thoughts on that? On why people would be against ceasefire and why people should ceasefire is a bare minimum. But why are people against it? And why should we why should they be for it? Why should we push it?
Well, I think people, and I'm not sure it's only Jewish people, but there are some people who feel that the Israeli government and the Jewish people equal each other. And so whatever the Israeli leaders say is what needs to be done to protect Jewish people around the world. And of course, that kind of misplaced loyalty is why we're in the situation we're in right now. Because the US government finds Israel to be a very important military outpost in the Middle East to help enforce oil policy favorable to the US, and knows very well about how the Holocaust has traumatized so many Jewish families generationally, and has really exploited that in a very hideous way. And so that's what's happening right now, is that people who have been educated in that way and expect the United States to behave in that way uncritically feel like a ceasefire is just appeasement rather than common sense. But I think that the way this government and these politicians have exploited that trauma for millions of people. I was part of a Jewish family for 17 years, and I encountered a number of people who were younger than I am who feel the consequences of the Holocaust in their lives across generations. And that's a horrible thing to have to carry around. But it's also a horrible thing when people are so cynical and cruel to exploit that for dollar gain. I think that's what's happening.
Absolutely. Brad, would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, I think another reason is that we have to be very honest about what the United States is. And it is a culture of militarism. It's a culture of violence. It has been for a long time. In its 248-year history, we've only known peace for 16 years. And so the wars we wage abroad are repeated at the wars we wage here at home. All the mass shootings, these are connected. You know, the violence done abroad, the death penalty, to the mass shootings done at home. This is a culture that is extremely violent, and there is a tendency toward bloodlust. And so when something like the Hamas attacks occur, the reaction often is bloodlust. And gosh, if we haven't learned anything from the wars of terror after 9/11, it should be that cooler heads should prevail after something catastrophic like that happens. And, you know, let's think about this. I often cite the example of, after 9/11, what if instead of 20 years of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, the United States had instead built 3,000 hospitals in Afghanistan, one in the name of each of the people who died at 9/11? Now, wouldn't that have been a much better way to go about resolving the issue? Wouldn't the United States have looked much more like the magnanimous country, you know, holding the higher moral ground after a really tragic act? And might the world be a far different place today than it is? The Brown University's Cost of War estimates that the number of people that the United States are responsible for having killed in these wars of terror is between 4 and 5 million people. That's directly and indirectly. That's an incredible number of civilians, of innocents who have perished. So yeah, the culture of violence here is something we need to look at closely.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, I feel like I could talk to you for like 5 hours. But what I want to do before we leave tonight, I want to give you guys a chance to kind of give the audience lasting thoughts, something to take with them about our conversation. I'm going to go to you, Nick, first, and then Brad, after you say what you'd like, if you can give the website and all of those things again. So, Nick?
Well, I think that maybe the most practical thing I can suggest is that people watch Al Jazeera on a very regular basis these days until this is over with. And I also would suggest that people get out in the street at every opportunity to call for a ceasefire and stop shipping weapons anywhere in the world.
Absolutely. Brad?
Yeah, I would ask people to organize in their communities, to recognize that you can't do it alone. You need to be joined with other people in order to make lasting change. So organize in your community, start a chapter, start an affiliate of one of these national organizations. They have incredible resources. Code Pink, World Beyond War, Pax Christi, Pace Bene, Peace Action, whoever it may be, Black Alliance for Peace. Look them up. They're all on our partners page at merchantsofdeath.org. They're all partners of ours in the tribunal. And organize in your community and make a difference, because you can make a difference. I definitely believe this is possible. And again, I would want to emphasize just the shared humanity that we all have. With climate catastrophe bearing down on this, we are running out of time. Resources are going to be scarce, and we are going to have to work together. So I think we can do that here in the United States in an enormous way by organizing. So I'll mention the website again. It's merchantsofdeath.org. You can go there to register for the tribunal. You can go there to find out lots of information about weapons manufacturers, about the issues of war and peace, and also about other peace organizations that are supporting the tribunal. So thank you very much, Joy. Really appreciate being on your show.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. And I would love to have you back after the 12th so we can kind of discuss how it went and everything. I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I will read your comments afterwards. Smash the like button, the subscribe, hit share, and tell everyone about Merchants of Death and this big event on the 12th. Get in the streets, get active. If you don't know of something happening in your area, just reach out to people. And if nothing's going on, create something. I've done it so many times. I've found people I never knew just by saying, hey, anyone want to do anything in Harrisburg area? And next thing you know, you have a person, they have people, and so on. Even if there's 5 people that show up, it's 5 more than none. So don't be afraid to have a small group or something. It doesn't matter. The point is you're still doing something. You're still getting your voice out there. And people in Gaza are listening. They know, because I've talked to several Palestinian people whose relatives are in Gaza who say they are hearing of these protests. They know that so many people are standing up for them. So this matters. And also individually, you have to think about this. In 40 years from now, are you going to be okay with the way you reacted during this time? Think about that. If you say, nah, I'm going to wish I did more, there's your answer. Get off your ass. We have work to do. So I'm very sweet. What can I say? But thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining. And thank you for all your incredible work you do.
Thank you. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you very much.
Take
Have a great
care,
night.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Much love.
Bye.